incredible people. Both of them, all three of them individually have like incredible life stories, but also they are doing incredible work already to, create a greater good, and in so many different fields. So we have on the right Tania, who is a neuroscientist, and like her science really looks into what's happening in our brain when we practices like compassion, for example. And it's her findings are world renowned. People all over the world speak about her findings, and for us it was a huge thing when it came to business and to actually talk about the science behind mindfulness, because all of a sudden people were like, what? Oh, there's science. Okay, then let's listen. Before that, it was just a woo-woo thing. So it's really important work that she's doing. And then we have Marc here in the middle. And Marc has been the head of the San Francisco Zen Center for many years, but also the CEO of the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, which is a nonprofit organization in San Francisco. That shares mindfulness around the world as a course that has once started at Google, and he was there at the very early beginning of that, and now he published a book. It's called The 7 Habits of a Mindful Leader. And last but not least, Darshita, thank you so much for being here. And she is the founder and CEO of Maanch, and is working on social entrepreneurship and connecting that with tech. So how can you support tech and social entrepreneurship and combine that? But also she works a lot in the for-profit section. So 3 different lives and stories, and that's why that's going to be the first question from my side. To really understand all of your journeys and what's your personal journey with mindfulness and compassion practice, and how did that show up in your life, and what did it do with all of you personally? I don't know who wants to start.
Sure. Personally, I think that mindfulness is not like an hour you dedicate in a day as a practice. I think mindfulness is living mindfully moment to moment. And I think I was blessed to have that awareness. I don't know where it came from, but I have always been very aware of what I do, how I'm perceived, whether if I said something, did it really hurt someone, or could I have done things differently? So I felt like I grew up with that way of being. And mindfulness as a theory and as a science only came to me later on, which actually said, oh, wow, so I've been doing all this already. This is awesome. I think the more tricky part is when we are younger, at least when I was younger, I felt like there was a lot of time for reflection in life, like here and now, and living in 21st century and being a founder, and being a mom, and being a wife, and being a daughter, and having so many demands from my time. I think that's where I have come to, where having a practice actually enables being more aware of moments where you can actually lose awareness. I'll start with that.
Well, I've been steeped in Zen meditation practice much of my life. I lived at the San Francisco Zen Center for 10 years. And then, of course, I went right to business school after that. And I started a company that was making calendars and greeting cards out of recycled paper. We were one of the first companies in the world. This was 1989. I started a company called Brush Dance, which I ran for 15 years. And then a few years after that, I found myself up in front of Google engineers teaching mindfulness and meditation. And so in some way, my life has been this kind of strange integration of meditation, mindfulness with business, and really wanting, my passion is about business as a force for good, using business as a force for good through training leaders to be more conscious and aware?
So my path was a bit like of a, schizophrenic person, because very long time I was first engaged in theater and opera, and I was doing all kind of personality development in that context, and then I was engaging a lot of spiritual retreats, and not, it was a long time before apps existed, so we had really to go to the big masters and to India and to, remote mountains and retreats and sit. But then I engaged in a PhD in neuroscience and psychology, and that was totally taboo. You couldn't say that you were coming back from a retreat. They would chop up your head. It was considered really gaga, something, which is really esoteric and strange. So I kind of learned to shut up about this part of my life, and I did my scientific career, like another life somehow. And then at some point I really felt, this is so crazy that psychology and neuroscience not really investigating such powerful transformative practices. What is psychology all about? And so something happened in the world at that time. It was around 2000. So I could get a European grant for the first time to do meditation research. It was unbelievable before. But then something opened up and it was possible, and a whole mindfulness movement came in. But then I was an empathy researcher, social neuroscientist, so my focus was always on opening the heart, on the, on the compassion part, on the empathy compassion part. And so I think what I did the last 20 years was a huge project we called Resource, is to try to expand a little bit beyond these kind of Western appreciation of mindfulness, which very often is misunderstood, I think, as pure attention training or efficiency training, and bring the whole picture of, ethics and of opening the heart, but also wisdom, perspective taking, and all these other components back into the picture. So I leave it up to that.
So thank you so much. And so, like Tania, you have started with looking into this already, but the next question would be how do you all bring this into life? What's the way you now, what are projects that you're working on, or things that you feel have the embodiment of these practices in them, but also show up in your career or working life?
Should I start? We go the whole way. So as I just said, I think it's almost 15 years or so ago, science is very, very slow. It's not so quick than, the business world. It's quick, but science is very slow. So I started a huge study. It's called the Resource Project, where we have 300 people which underwent a 1-year mental training, meditation-based training. And we measured these 300 people with 90 different measures. So I'm always saying social neuroscience is not just about the brain. The brain is one. But we are looking at the autonomic system, at your body, at hormonal responses, but also at the phenomenology. So we're also doing consciousness interviews of a minute of conscious experience, which is translated into 1-hour interview. And then we transcribe this qualitative data to see what is actually the experience when you meditate different practices. Because that was also something we were super interested in, is to not speak about meditation or mindfulness as one thing, but to start differentiated between different mental practices and how different they feel. And so we also measure brain, of course, and we can show that depending on which practice you do, 30 minutes every day, you will have cortical thickness changes in different areas of the brain, different networks, supporting either social emotion like compassion or empathy, or more kind of cognitive processes like metacognitive abilities. And anyway, there's a lot to say. We have almost 30 papers out now with different, aspects of how this mental capacity can change, your body, your immune system, your stress system, your brain, but also your experience in life and your connectivity with other people. So that's one, way we kind of...
One more question. What makes your heart shine? Why are you doing this work?
I mean, for me, before all the papers came out and the scientific data, I saw 300 people transforming in front of my eyes. I saw how they were changing every week, and that made my heart go open. It was such a beauty. And, people said, you are totally crazy. You will have a dropout rate of 80%. They have to go and retreat. They're middle in their work life, 30 minutes a day, once a week to go with teachers. You will never, and then they are tested with 90 measures. We had a dropout rate less than 8%. I mean, basically nothing for a year and 300 people. And they were continuing self-organizing to continue practice. And to see that transformation was better than any data I could produce later, but the data was nice too. That's my geeky side, when you see the brains. When I saw the first time these cortical thickness change data, it felt like bringing a rocket to the moon, because I was trained in neuroscience, and people said, with 25, your brain is not plastic anymore. It just decreases, it gets old. It's just getting thinner and atrophy. And so we didn't expect it actually in such high level, network to find any growth and any thickening of gray matter. So when you see these data for the first time, you're like, yeah, this was like, this is also quite a nice thing.
Thank you.
But what makes my heart bump now is to bring this into society. After 20 years of lab research, this stuff needs to go out into schools and health system and so on.
Thanks so much for that.
The current focus of the work I'm doing now is around a book that recently published called 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader, with the subtitle Lessons from Google and a Zen Monastery Kitchen. And in some way, a few things I find myself saying often. One is that if you're not cultivating trust, you're cultivating cynicism, right? So cultivating, I think being cynical is kind of the default, and greed, hate, and delusion have been popular for thousands of years among human beings, and they seem to play out really nicely in the business world where there's lots of pressures. So I like a lot of, and I'll go ahead and answer your second question, which is what really brings me alive is bringing the human element into business. I'm amazed sometimes, even sometimes people in companies will work there for 10 or 20 years and never talk to each other, never see each other outside of their roles. And it turns out that seeing people as humans is actually good for business. It's actually helps people to be more trusting and less cynical.
Thank you, Marc.
Thank you. I'll use these. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'll actually use that as a bridge. For me personally, there is no such thing as work life and work and life. It's just life's work. And so I personally see, and that's what we inculcate at work as well, is to see every human being as a fellow human being, not as a fellow employee or something else that we create as structure. So when people have left organization, then there is still that continuity and link. I have one person right here in front of me where I think relationships come in and out and the context changes, but the relationship still exists. And so in terms of how I inculcate and live this every day, I can say that also as a mother, as every time I notice that I'm asking my daughter not to pick up a glass object in a shop, I notice that it's coming from a fear that if she dropped something, I would have to pay for it. And that program is running me all the time, and I am stopping her from being curious, from being adventurous, everything that parents want their children to be. So from a very personal choice-making point of view, I feel like I adopt that sometimes excessively, but also from a work point of view and professionally, there are so many times, and the pressure of running a startup where it is so easy to make a decision that can be mindfully counterproductive, to the long-term interest of the organization. And to mindfully choose a more difficult path and keeping a team inspired and working along is a huge challenge, but also an accomplishment when we all get there together.
Thank you. And what makes your heart shine?
Sharing, like now. Sharing what I know makes me, happy.
Thank you. So I have one more question for you, and then we will open up to you as an audience for questions or things that interest you. So the last question is, when you all look into the future and, the fourth industrial revolution and all these complexities and also challenges that we all face, what is it that you see that that will be helpful to kind of like co-create that new future and the years to come, and also maybe what can we do to create a world for the next generations to come? What's in your heart, or what moves you to contribute to that, or also what you want us all to contribute to it?
So now you start in the middle. We have all the constellations.
It's funny these days when it comes to predicting the future. I'm from the United States, and I think electing Obama was impossible. Electing Trump, even more impossible. So who can predict the future? But I do think, and I liked what you said earlier about, are you working from love, or are you working from fear? And certainly I would like to think of a future that is more based on making decisions and moving toward a more loving future, as opposed to a fearful future. And I think when it comes to especially things like technology and business and how we respond to climate change, I think is going to be a huge test for our world. And so far, it doesn't look so great. It's a little scary. But as I said, who can predict the future? And in some way, one of my favorite quotes is by a man named Wendell Berry, who's a fifth-generation Kentucky farmer, and he said, "Be joyful, though you've considered all the facts."
So in terms of future, I'm a psychologist. I always believe that inner change is a very, very powerful, very powerful force, and that we really have to, that all these crises we see, millions of crises, that they have a common ground, which is somehow in an over focus of all our big system to put the motivation of achievement, of power, of competition in the forefront, while things like, for example, love, the word in natural science, you cannot even utter it. People think this is a private sphere word. You can have it with your children and your loved one, but you should not have it in business and in science and in these big systems which are actually creating, the disaster we create. So in a way, I think, there need to be a huge shift in inner priorities and change and values and intentions we set. But at the same time, what I learned through the hard way, through falling on my nose again and again, is that I was so idealistic. I thought, you can change, institution just by doing compassion work, mindfulness. And I didn't realize that actually the institutional design, the DNA, is very, very strong force of changing people and changing their motivation. And so I think you really need to bring together to really have societal change and institutional change in terms of the design. And just concretely in science, it's all about being first author. You have only 3 years contracts. You have to publish like mad. You are evaluated all the time. It's very difficult to find, to basically lead a mindful, compassionate group. It's a challenge. And so you need to have a congruency between the context you are, I think also for business, the financial market. You have very loving fathers, and then they go into the finance market where the design is all about competitive, intentions, and they will be a totally different person. So I think we really need to work together, people who are like experts in social and system design with people who are expert in internal change. And I think that could, really bring a huge necessary change. Because when it comes to climate change, I have to be a bit cynical. I talk to all the scientists, and then you are depressed afterward. You're like, there's no chance we can just enjoy and laugh, But it's like almost gone, It's like.
Thank you. Climate change. I would say that one of the biggest reasons why we will not achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular, if you want to talk about climate change, I think is because we all have the awareness that we are living on the planet, which is our home, yet we are living in a context where there are countries, and countries are chopping and changing their credits and limits. And I think these kind of structures are not conducive to, but that's for a climate change talk, not for, not for here. In terms of the future, I personally think that to achieve the impossible, we have to break it down into possible steps. And when we are in committed action, and I know that for myself, when I commit to something, then my future is like right now. I can see it. And I know that just personally through the life that I have led, that there are so many incredible synchronicities, coincidences, serendipities, whatever you want to call it, that have happened just because I have chosen to be and show up in a particular way that would not have been possible had I not chosen that path. I say my journey is from the bottom 1% to the top 1% for 100%. And so if you consider me a few years ago being in Mumbai with almost no resources, there is no ways at that stage if someone told me, 20 years from now, you're going to be in Berlin speaking to a bunch of people who are not your skin color, I would have just gone like, that's not going to happen. And I was so shy and I had such low self-esteem that I never felt I had anything important to share. And so I feel that when the fire to make something happen and to see a different reality is ignited, then all kinds of magic happens.
Thank you so much. So I'm gonna open up for all of you. So if you have any questions or something that hooked you or you want to know more about.
I would like to ask all the three of you, since you're working on a pretty high aggregate level, what is or let's ponder a little bit about the question about like individual changes through like mindfulness and really the systemic question that we really have to ask, because time and again we're saying it's good if you practice mindfulness, but again, if we don't change the larger operating system, for example, on this financial market, there's not really that much to win, it's a lose-lose situation. Just how is this seemingly Gordian knot, to be cut through, just to ponder on that question.
I would say that I think we all harbor what I think of as our own theory of change, and mine is that it's through changing a small number of individuals that systems will change. And I've noticed that in Google, it was one person, one engineer said, let's bring mindfulness into Google, and he did it as a separate project. And now there have been, I think, more than 10,000 Google employees who've been trained in mindfulness. And this is true in other, now it hasn't as yet changed this, it hasn't quite, is Google as a company going to shift how it works in the world? I'm hopeful that it will continue to work, that I think through raising consciousness more and more, we'll see those shifts, but it's much slower. But that's still my theory. I'm sticking with my theory so far.
There's one article which appeared in The Guardian, I think 2 weeks ago or so. It's called The Mindfulness Conspiracy. And I thought it was a very critical article. I don't know whether you read it. And I thought there were some lessons which were really good in this article, where they said, if mindfulness movement becomes a kind of individualistic movement of, make people less stressed, cope better with these kind of unhuman environments, it can also make people apolitical. So it's like, instead of changing the kind of unhuman system we are living in, we have to operate in with huge amount of stress and achievement, and turnover and fast pace. Of course, then mindfulness can become a bit like a commodity, like a product where we can do money with, and we can have apps, and we can have biofeedback stuff and so on. But then it's not really, we're not motivated anymore to say let's change also the conditions under which we operate in society. And I thought this article had a point. What people call now make mindfulness movement. You have like 2 days and you will change your life, and that's bullshit, of course. You don't change. I mean, it's a lifetime consciousness journey we have to go. So in a way, I think it's important to stay aware that we need also institutional change, and that we need to work together with people who do that. And even, what I got more and more aware by becoming older, the legal system has a huge amount of power. And when there are conflicts in institutions, usually it breaks down to legal. And, I just heard a talk this morning, even our governments are like 2/3 of people who have law backgrounds. It's not like psychology backgrounds or Zen backgrounds. And they think, about worlds through a complete different set of glasses. And so I think we need to start communicating with this backbone as people who are like focusing on individual change, so that we can come together and really work on system change. That's my little theory of change. But it evolved over time, and over also feeling helpless sometimes about just inner change.
Yeah, just hey, Tania,
Hi.
great seeing you again. Big fan of your work. Related to the systems change, what do you guys, the three of you, have any comments related to organizational culture and engineering organizational culture, given actually creating a functional mythology within a company, so that the employees can actually develop as they're doing the work that they're doing, especially related to things now. People are exploring new management techniques like holacracy and things.
Yes.
And then, actually, because of this panel, given we have Zen, and I heard synchronicity brought up a couple times as well too, this notion that as you kind of live and work and live from flow, and you have an organization that are in flow, kind of like these basketball teams or these World Cup soccer teams, female World Cup soccer teams that we're watching, that synchronicities and things happen in a more fluid, kind of dynamic, organic way, naturally, which is kind of in harmony, rather. And how, so the questions there are organizational culture, and at the higher performing versions of that, of really looking at kind of flow states and kind of group dynamic in flow, and bigger forces at work, or Zen in connection with universal nature in an Asian perspective.
Thank you. Do you want to start with that? Yeah.
It's interesting. I think there are some really some new and potent kind of cultural philosophies and disciplines that are emerging. One that I've recently come in touch with is called compassionate accountability, which I think, again, I think there's always a natural tension between compassion and accountability, and to I think it's about becoming more and more aware of the tensions, right? So I think the reason that the systems are the way that they are is that fear and greed have won out, right? Fear, and our systems are mostly based. I think so, sometimes they're well-meaning people. Like I often think of like the company, the American company Coca-Cola. I don't think people had any idea that they were creating what was basically, a semi-poisonous drink. They just thought they were creating something that people loved, and it made a lot of money. And I think it must be really hard to wake up and to find out that, oh, this thing that I created is actually bad for people. And then how do we react to that? As opposed to let's keep going and making billions of dollars. But I think these are the kinds of questions I think we're facing in all. Our systems, I think, are incredibly outdated in everything. Energy, food, yeah. It's all outdated systems. And the question, even asking the question, the questions you're asking, I think, are great. How do we change these systems?
Thank you. I'll add to that. And specifically to your question, a large part of my career I have spent as a leadership coach and consultant, taking very senior leaders on learning journeys and including embedding holacracy at one of the US organizations. My personal take on having done different kinds of interventions with teams and from a culture perspective to really shift from whatever has been in place to becoming a more purposeful enterprise has been where it starts from the top, where if the owners, the investors, the founders, the executive team of an organization do not send a strong message that this is important to them as well and that they care for everyone that's part of the organization, it's very difficult to start something that is a culture change initiative from the bottom. That's one. Second, I also think that increasingly, like if we just take the Coca-Cola example, but any industry that is doing something that is incrementally bad for the planet or for people are starting to have higher and higher attrition. And they will continue to do so until and unless they reinvent their core product and or reinvent their business model where they start sharing what they earn to the stakeholders that are impacted by it. As a founder of an organization myself, we do start meetings with silence. We don't have job descriptions for anyone. It's more a purpose-aligned structure. So that gives the individual, at least I recognize that from my own living, that I keep growing and I don't necessarily accord to what I said yesterday I would do. And I want to have the personal flexibility that I can choose what I want to do and integrate what I have learned before. And I think organizations that are creating structures that enable their staff to continually evolve and keep contributing and shifting them around into different roles are the organization that will have a thriving culture in the future.
And perhaps like the one thing which I might add, which is not my research, but Frédéric Laloux, who has written this book, Reinventing Organization, and he has kind of observed, like 12 or 20 different companies who basically have already invented themselves without knowing from each other, like kind of non-hierarchical system without CEO where the employees are basically paying, they are deciding what they want to get paid, and really radical shifts. Now, a lot of people have read the book and then they said, we want this organization too. I don't want a chef, I don't want a boss anymore. I don't want to have hierarchies anymore. Great, I can, decide what I earn and then I get it. So a lot of people were very enthusiastic, but then Frédéric Laloux has told me in a personal conversation that the problem is that they didn't see that it also needs very, very mindful and very responsible agents. So if you have been raised in a very hierarchical structure where you could give away half of your responsibility to the hierarchy and just dump everything on the boss when something goes wrong, and then you are asked from one day to the other to shift into a complete, different system. That actually needs education. It needs kind of moving from one to the other system. It needs inner work. And for this inner work, he told me that a lot of organizations need at least a year or more, and a lot of spaces and people who really facilitate this inner work to move from one model to the other. And that wasn't written in his book, or perhaps just with small letters, but in terms of organization, trying it, I think it's very important to know that if you want to shift your organization, you need to make space for this inner work and really take it seriously so that people can move into this full responsible, non-hierarchical, work. But then it's great, it's wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you three. It's been amazing, and it's kind of like, as you all can see, it's only the start of a really big discussion that we hopefully all are gonna have much more in the future to really find out. And I think that's also part of the new paradigm shift, is we can only find a solution all together. And that's why we invite you to stay, also come to the stage. Also tomorrow we have a lot of topics, because it's really about not one opinion, but more like seeing different perspectives and trying to find that, joint conversation on what is it and how could it work, and maybe trial and error and sharing what worked for some and what didn't work for others. So thank you again for all of you for your openness and dedication.